There are 5 players in the NBA this season averaging at least 19 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists a game. Of course, you have the megastars in Nikola Jokic and Giannis. You also have the high-volume playmaking fives in Sabonis and Şengün, and then you have one who's not really like the others, and that's Jalen Johnson. Jalen's a very unique player who can sort of fit into any different role on any given possession. That's played a huge part in Atlanta shifting their approach this season and winning more than half their games. Probably the biggest difference in terms of playstyle between the Hawks of this year and last has been the emphasis on playing with pace. Last season, they were already one of the faster teams in the NBA, ranking 9th in offensive pace at about 14.5 seconds per possession. But this year, they've taken it up a notch, playing nearly an entire second faster at 13.4, which is good for 3rd in the league. Their roster is filled with rangy, athletic forwards who excel in the open floor, the most prominent one, of course, being Jalen Johnson. It starts with his verticality. He's an incredibly explosive leaper who's constantly looking to get above the rim for big-time finishes. But even when he isn't throwing it down with authority, he's got the size and touch to score on just about any defender in traffic. Through 31 games this season, he's attempted 187 shots at the rim while making an impressive 73.3% of them, many of which are just really tough looks. In transition, he's able to self-create these opportunities at a pretty consistent rate. He's officially listed by the NBA as 6'8", and he's got a really lengthy frame that allows him to step into different finishing angles with crafty strides. With that size and length, he's also got power, so in the event that he's playing fast and his lane gets taken away, he can just go through his defender's chest to create the separation he needs. He's averaging over 5 points a game in transition, good enough to land him in the top 20 as he actively contributes to one of the league's highest volume fast break offenses. As for the half court, that unique combination of size, athleticism, and touch allows Jalen to be used in a seemingly endless amount of ways. You'll see him spend a decent amount of time in the dunker spot where he's able to space the floor vertically. And when he's operating around the basket like this, not only is he a threat to finish plays, he's a threat to extend them on the offensive glass. What's so interesting though is that within Atlanta's system, a lot of Jalen's time is spent mimicking the role of a typical center. They really like to use him as the screener in pick and rolls with Trey, where his skill set makes him a really tough cover. Of course, Trey's the type of ball handler who's going to draw a ton of aggressive coverages out in space, which means that Jalen's often catching the ball in the short roll. The Hawks like to set up the floor with their actual 5 in the dunker spot, and Jalen's one of the best in the game at taking advantage of that 2-on-1. It starts with his ability to finish over the top of shot blockers. If he gets the ball in the short roll and has space to take off vertically, most rim protectors don't stand a chance. If he gets the ball in the short roll and the rim protector steps over early, taking away the space to launch, he can counter with a soft touch floater. And if the rim protector steps up even higher to take away that floater, he can mask it into a lob to the big man. With that said though, more times than not, Trey's gonna be running pick and roll with the 5, which means that Jalen's typically spotting up somewhere on the perimeter. I wouldn't say he's some high-level spot-up shooter, but I definitely don't think he's the type of guy that defenses are intentionally leaving open. Over the past 2 seasons, he's made 35.5% of his catch-and-shoot threes, which isn't great but also isn't bad, pretty typical of what you'd expect from an average to slightly below average shooter. And when he's wide open, that number jumps all the way up to over 39% on 200 attempts. So again, like I said, not a guy who I think the defense necessarily wants shooting the ball without a closeout. As a result, defenders are going to react when he catches the ball out on the perimeter, which then opens up his game as an off-the-catch attacker. From there, you'll see some of the same stuff I've already talked about. If he beats a closeout and is left with space to take off vertically, he can finish over just about any shot blocker. If he beats a closeout but doesn't have that space, he can use some of those lengthy strides to create a finishing angle from the floor. And of course, if he beats a closeout then draws extra help in the paint, he's a skilled enough passer to find the open man for high quality offense. Because he's so good at playing off the catch, the Hawks like to spot him up just one pass away from Trae on the wing. That way, if the defense brings any immediate help, he's the guy they can go to as a counter. Take this play for example. As Trae sets up the pick and roll, Jalen's positioned on the opposite wing. And as soon as Jalen's man starts to drop to help in the paint, you're going to see him relocate into open space up top. That gives him a lane to attack, where he draws help and lobs it up for the big. Here's another one. This time Trae's going to set up the pick and roll from up top, so Jalen's a bit deeper on the wing, almost in the corner. The same thing happens though with Jalen's man tagging the roll, to which he counters with his movement, sneaking baseline for a lob. He's also a really good connector in these spots. If Trae draws an aggressive coverage and doesn't have an angle to pass the ball to the roller, he can move it over to Jalen on the wing to make that pass for him. And these types of plays aren't exclusive to when he's playing one pass away from Trae. He spends a lot of time floating into different spots on the floor to connect the offense as a passer. Because of his height, he has access to angles over the top of the defense, so they also like to have him initiate from out on the perimeter. Whenever the Hawks go to set action, he's the guy who's capable of taking advantage of every option. On this one, he recognizes that LeBron's calling for a switch, but with Ricochet having inside position on connect, he proactively places a pass to the slip for easy points. Sometimes they'll start him in the mid-post to set up these actions, and it's the same thing because the paint is cleared, he's easily able to see over the top of his defender, and he's got a great eye for cutters. But the biggest difference is that when his back is to the basket in these spots, he's not only a threat to pass. Especially if he's got a smaller guy on him, he can go to work in the post. He may not be a traditional on-ball creator, but you can clearly see the makings of him potentially developing that part of his game. He's already a force in transition, is a decisive attacker off the catch who can score in a variety of ways at the rim, has a little bit of a post game, and is a really good passer. And that's exactly why the Hawks actually use him as their point guard whenever Trae's not in the game. In these minutes, they like to play extremely fast. Jalen's constantly looking to push the pace in early offense, which is natural when you don't have a traditional point guard to break things down in the half court. The defense isn't able to properly set, defenders are in a backpedal, and the 6'8" athlete driving down the middle can take complete advantage. To mix things up a bit, they'll set lots of screens in these early offense situations. This time it's a handoff into a pick and roll, and by the time Cornette can even realize what's happening, Jalen's already lobbing it up top. When things do slow down though, it isn't pick and roll they're looking to set up. Rather, they like to have a guard or a wing screen for Jalen on the ball so that he can turn the corner and attack a mismatch. If he receives the screen and that second defender doesn't jump out in either a hedge or a switch, he'll attack that open space on one of his explosive drives. The thing is, when that defender does jump out in a good hedge and Jalen doesn't have space to attack, then he's often forced to play in isolation, where some of his limitations really start to show up. He isn't the greatest ball handler, which means that when he drives into tight spaces with added help, he often has to pick up his dribble early. Here's a great example. He doesn't get by Isaiah Joe with his initial burst of speed, then doesn't create any separation on a spin, only to pick up his dribble for a tougher look over the top. Not only can he not do much with his handle, his ball security is pretty questionable, which does result in a decent amount of turnovers. You'll see some plays where he attacks, draws help, and picks up his dribble with nowhere to go, and it's not like this is necessarily unusual for a player of his stature, but it's more of an issue than it otherwise would be thanks to a complete lack of a mid-range game. He isn't comfortable pulling up for jumpers with downhill momentum, so on a play like this where he has the space, he first picks up his dribble and spins into a more difficult opportunity. For these reasons, it's pretty clear to me that he still isn't all the way ready to be a true primary offensive centerpiece. I think there are pathways to improving, and it has to start with the handle and the mid-range game. But as things currently stand, I view him as a pretty premier complementary guy. The off-ball utility, the screen and roll game, the outside shooting, slashing off the catch, and connective passing, we're still talking about a seriously talented offensive player that just about any team in the league would love to add to their roster. As for the other side of the ball, well, he's definitely got some defensive utility as well. The Hawks primarily use him as a low man where he can rely on his size, length, and verticality to alter shots at the rim. Now don't get me wrong, he's not some high-level paint defender who's just shutting down teams under the basket, but as a second or third guy rotating over and picking up drives, rolls, or cuts, he's more than capable of offering resistance. And that unlocks a lot of versatility. The reason they can have a guy like Okongwu closing out from the paint to the three-point line is because if he gets beat, they have another line of defense down low. Some of these saves at the rim are really impressive. This time he's roaming over from the weak side, and as soon as he sees a cutter, he springs into position and takes off vertically. On this one, the offense tries to occupy him by having his man clear out while they run pick and roll, but he gets into position early to stop the roll and just stands tall. When he's coming over early from the weak side like this to tag rollers, his physical tools still allow him to cover that skip pass to the corner. He's got really long arms and pretty decent hands, which allows him to sit in the gaps and cover multiple spots on the perimeter at once. This time he's matched up with a shooter on the wing, sinks to the nail to tag a roller, and ends up deflecting a pass to the corner. Here's one where he's defending a shooter one pass away, and he shades over to help on a LeBron post-up, then deflects a pass to a cutting Anthony Davis. Because he's really quick on his feet, whenever he does come over early or sit in the gaps like this, he's able to recover to his man on a closeout, so it's not like he's actively giving up threes. But I will say there is one flaw that jumps out to me when watching the Hawks, and that's the fact that he tends to have a lot of these lazier closeouts that result in him getting beat off the dribble. In general, I don't think he's the quickest processor, so offenses can have a little bit of success by putting him into the primary action. He also isn't the most technically sound on-ball defender, so when he does get switched onto perimeter players, he is a little bit prone to blow-bys. Shiftier guards typically don't have much trouble getting by his hip, so those aren't the best matchups for him, although in the event that he does move well enough to stay in between his man and the basket, that verticality goes a long way at the rim. And don't get me wrong, he absolutely has his moments as a wing defender. Particularly against Boston, I was really impressed with the way he handled the Jaylen Brown assignment. Here's a really good rep where he slides his feet to cut off a drive, absorbs a couple bumps to hold his position, and completely shuts off the paint. I also really liked the way he matched up with Evan Mobley in both of their matchups against the Cavs. And it's all thanks to those physical tools. There aren't many defenders in the league tall, strong, and quick enough to handle Mobley, and Jalen checks all of those boxes. So when you talk about him as an overall two-way player, there's no way you can't at least consider him for an all-star spot in the Eastern Conference. Not only does he do all of the little things that make teams win games on the margins, he's an absolute stat sheet stuffer, doing it all from scoring efficiently, to rebounding and assisting, to picking up steals and blocking shots. After all, there's a reason why the Hawks are above 500 and why he's one of the betting favorites for most improved player. When he's on the court, good things happen on both ends of the floor, and he just turned 23 years old, so there's still so much room for growth. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think of Jalen. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.